So you are a courageous crowd. This topic, we had a difficult time figuring out who was going to be courageous enough to be in the chair because the conversation of politics at work can be a little daunting. And I'm curious, for those of you who came, raise your hand if you had a personal or professional connection to this. Like you are part of the team that might need to be on the response of anything. Okay, so this is like your day job. Fantastic. One of the things we want to do at the end is curate the wisdom in the room. So the Q&A will be potentially back at you to share some of the best practices because this is all a work in progress. So welcome. My name is Sally Thornton. I run a company called Forche that's all about trying to make great teams and to make teams great. And it's my joy to help curate some of the stories from my CPO group. So the backstory, the context as to why this came about is it's all Kate's fault. So I facilitate a CPO group where we tell the truth. And I say that not that the other groups don't, but that every time you join a community of whatever size, you have to decide what parts of yourself you can share in that group. And in this group, we keep it rather small. We're maxed at 30 people because we want to actually know each other and not be like, remind me where you are again. And did you have kids? Or where do you live? Like, those are important things to sort of ground in relationships, but they don't get to the deeper level of how do we help each other thrive in our full lives. So when we were in conversation this summer, Kate was sharing a story that was off script. So we do a lot of off script stuff. And it's the reason this came about because sometimes in the quiet moments, stories emerge that are like, wait, what? Other people need to know this story. So that's the first story. So I'm going to interview Kate and we're going to have each person then rotate. This is Robin's genius of trying to keep panels interesting so we're not just staring at each other. But then at the end, after each of us interviews one person for 10 minutes, then we're going to all be up here and we're going to do Q&A. And the most important thing I would say is that we're all a work in progress, and the idea of how we're thinking about this and how we're approaching it is all a work in progress. So I would say hold it lightly. There's going to be a lot of good intellectual fodder. There's going to be some feelings, and I just invite you to, be in that conversation with us, knowing that we're all kind of making it up as we go along. We just want to make it up a little bit better and keep learning, right? Everything's about experimentation. So we learn through story, and from the stories that we gather, we'll also offer up frameworks to consider of what do we distill down from some of these stories. And we'll learn that some of these stories don't fit in the framework. So let's start with what framework did you have at your organization? Give us a 1 minute of what your organization is all about, purpose, and then how you might have thought about politics before, and then what actually emerged in real life.
Sure. So my company that I am the chief people officer for is a small biotech company. One of my colleagues is here, Michelle. And we are a publicly traded cell therapy company that is not yet commercial, right? So we're pre-FDA approval. And when I joined, the company was about 58 people. We are now about 200 today. And I would say, like many small startups, we didn't have any frameworks for politics. And as we were thinking about, yesterday's keynote in the morning, you never really know what's coming at you. It's a highly volatile environment, a lot of uncertainty. And so I would say that we quickly we did find our way into a framework quickly with some of the changes that happened around us when Roe v. Wade was overturned. Our CEO was in my office immediately saying, we're going to put out a statement on this to the company because this is about access to healthcare, and I want our team members to know that we will protect their access to healthcare. This is a company issue. And I was like, that's great. I applaud it. Also, we operate in 2 states where, for now, this right is very protected, so that's good, but nothing's ever certain, right? So we put out a company statement on that, protecting, ensuring that our people knew they would have access to the healthcare they needed, whatever it took. And then, of course, within a matter of weeks, it felt like, Russia invaded Ukraine, and we had team members coming to us to say, can we put out a message about, can you put out a message about it? And we had a quick confab, and we decided, we would not put out a message on that. We would support our team members in whatever messaging. They wanted to do some fundraising. So we support you in doing that, but it's not going to come from like the central company email. This is something you can do. We are very supportive of you doing this fundraising, but this is not an issue of healthcare or of health access. So you be you. And then what really, though, kind of tested us, I would say, is came, a year later when Hamas attacked Israel. And very quickly, a few things came to light. It was obviously not a situation where there was a need, where anyone was expecting that we would do a company response. But what came to light very quickly is we had some people in the organization who had some very swift and very high personal responses to what was going on the ground there. And the first signal was that one of our scientists, who's Israeli and a former member of IDF, and who grew up in a kibbutz that was attacked, and whose aunt and uncle were taken hostage that first day. And she immediately started sharing what she was feeling, experiencing, and thinking on LinkedIn. And Michelle might remember this, because our CEO kind of called me into his office and was like, hey, have you seen what's on LinkedIn? And I was like, no. And he said, look, I just want you to see this, and this is okay. Like, I want you to know that I know this is okay. She can say whatever she wants. This is her experience. I disagree with some of what she's saying. Context, he is Egyptian American. He is married to a woman who is Lebanese. So they, as he would probably say, he's like a brown person in America. They have 4 children, and their children look like all of the children that we are now seeing pictures of in Gaza. And he's like, look, she has the right to say what she wants, but I am also going to say how I feel. So like, mark this moment. I was like, okay. So what emerged very quickly and very noticeably to anyone who was following LinkedIn from within our company is that we had like disagreement within the house on what was going on a global level. And where people's emotions went quickly was like, well, we feel for, to be honest, a lot of people were like, he's the CEO, he's fine. We feel for her because his position power far outweighs her. So like, how does it feel to know that your higher 3 levels up boss has a different point of view than you, and you're both being very public about it? And what I found is that especially like her colleagues kind of formed a protective circle and were kind of like, are you okay? Not just are you okay because of how this is affecting your family, but are you okay because of what the CEO is saying publicly? And amazingly, I'll just skip to the punchline, this has actually all been remarkably smooth. And so the question I've asked myself many times is, why? How did this not like rip apart the fabric of this company? And I'll pause there.
Wait, I mean, I'm on my edge.
I'm gonna make you ask me.
I do know the ending,
Yeah.
right? But she's gonna make it seem like I have really interesting questions. What happened next?
Thanks, Sally. Well, I mean, as these things are, it did just unfold a bit organically for a while. But what I think, warmed my heart was, so we also are in 2 different places geographically, and these 2 people were in 2 different places geographically. So it is not like they were bumping into one another in the hallway. But the next time that my CEO visited the office where all of the scientists work, he made a point to sit down with her. And they had kind of like, I'm imagining like you would in like the UN. Like I think they just closed the door and they sat down and they had a chat.
Wow.
And what I heard from both of them separately was like, I understand where the other person is coming from. I understand why they feel the way they feel. And they understand why I feel the way I feel. And we don't have to agree on this. And I respect their right to say what they want to say. And this was probably even more important, he spent time with her colleagues. Like he invited the space for people to then engage with him because they were worried about her, which is another thing I love about our company is like they cared.
Yeah.
They wanted to make sure she was okay. And so he invited dialogue with them and he engaged with them on like, look, you can talk to her, but I think, we are good.
Yeah.
Let's now talk about what questions do you have for me? And he engaged from kind of here's the facts as I understand them. Here's why I feel the way I feel. You don't have to agree with me. It's kind of like Vivian said this morning, like, you don't have to agree with me.
Even though I know I'm right. That was Vivian's point.
But yeah, so amazingly, we have come through this with very few ripples. I checked in with her actually last week. I was in our office there. And so, yeah, I'll kind of pause there and see where you want to probe.
Well, actually, I mean, I think you've said it really beautifully. What's interesting is what we're going to talk about at the end around structure is when are things a public statement of the company? When are things a private issue between employees? And how do you manage that tension? And then the improv that you demonstrated around we're figuring this out as we go along. I'm curious, when you were in that conversation with him, were those his instincts to like talk to the teammates around her? Like, how much do leaders need to like figure this shit out themselves versus like how much do we need to give them counsel to walk these difficult tightropes?
Ooh, great question. I mean, again, I think you have to know your leaders, and I think you have to know your company. So again, go back to where I started. We are a biotech company. We are stocked to the brim with scientists and engineers, and their way of engaging is to invite divergent perspectives.
Love it.
They are looking, they want to see the facts. They want to understand. If you disagree with me, tell me your facts because maybe you'll change my mind. That is literally how our company operates. That is kind of foundational to our culture. So that type of divergent thinking is welcome because we think it drives innovation in our product.
Yep.
So I think in this case, I didn't actually have to nudge him at all. I think he understood both kind of it's who he is as a human, but it's also who we are as a company, that like you have to be able to make sure that people can say whatever they want to say.
Yeah. What about the board? Did they weigh in?
Oh yeah, my thought on this was they knew what they were getting when they put him in place. Like, so he is someone who, this is a leader who's been outspoken about issues of equity and justice his whole career. So none of us could have predicted this exact scenario would occur, but 100% the board knew who they were putting in place in this seat. And so the board has been nothing but supportive. We've had, as I understand it, only one investor who called and tried to make a fuss and was quickly, he engaged with that person as well. But at the end of the day, he's like, I'm not trying to convince anyone. This is my point of view. You don't have to share it.
I think that's a really interesting point, right? When are we speaking from a place of this is a point of view and my job is not to actually convince you, it's just to share information, right? Versus when are we trying to persuade or shift? I think of like the Patagonia example of like, they're trying to shift to climate-friendly policies. So when they say things, it is actually to change the future.
Okay.
So
I want to make one last point before I bring Masi up here, which is that the other thing it really illustrated for me is the critical nature of like, what do you really mean inclusion, right? So inclusion is really core to who we are, and you cannot have inclusion with exceptions. You cannot say we want to hear all of you accept your point of view on global issues or accept your point. So you have to create space for inclusion to mean all of it.
Love it. Okay, that's story number one. Buckle your seats.
All right. Thank you. So I am welcoming up to the stage Masi Amianda. And Masi and I worked together at one very large company. But do you want to say a little bit about
Twice. I worked for Kate twice. We worked together at McKesson. It's her fault as well that I'm here today. So thank you, Kate.
So the first question I have for you, Masi, is you have worked at some very large, very global companies, including the one you're at today. So how do you think that influences the approach to navigating global issues and politics in your companies?
Yeah. So before I start, I do have to say that I'm speaking based on my own experience and not on behalf of Google. So all of these are really seasoned and well thought out hypotheticals. But if you have questions later, let me know. I thought about this question a lot, and I think what's amazing when you work for a large corporation that's truly global, meaning they have multiple sites and multiple locations, that you really benefit from the richness of just the difference. And you also benefit from being able to attract really great talent no matter what, right? So instead of having the best talent in New Jersey, you have the best talent in the world. That war on talent knows no boundaries and has pushed, many of the corporations I've worked for to all four corners of the earth. But what also, if you think about whether you work for a profit-driven organization or a nonprofit, scale and scope is really everyone's dream, right? If you're working for a nonprofit, you want to help as many people as possible that meet your vision. If you're selling widgets, you want to sell as many widgets as possible. And I think that when it comes to like politics and sort of, what is your strategy or what is your approach, you have to sit back and acknowledge that most of any political situation is going to be reactionary. Corporate and organizational communications are really well thought out. We've got branding plans, we've got marketing plans, et cetera, et cetera. But when it comes to like politics and the things that move the world and that people get passionate about, it's always, always reactionary. And so, that being said, I think in our current age, everyone acknowledges people want almost a religious experience at work. People are really searching for their leadership to give them something more than just a paycheck. And I think that can work to your advantage, but it is always going to have its limits when it comes to politics, right? So think about even nonprofits that are focused on making sure everyone has clean water. They don't necessarily speak up about every single environmental issue that comes across your newsfeed. And so it's really, really difficult, and people struggle all the time. When Kate shared her example, I thought of a real life example where, we have operations in Google in Tel Aviv. And so when the incursion happened with Hamas, there were two, managers, leaders on a call, and everyone starts signing into our Google GVC. And our leaders in Tel Aviv are in fatigues because they are on call. They might be called into action. And so one of the leaders, who was Muslim, said, "Oh, wow, this feels like Israel's 9/11. Like, I'm so sorry for what you've gone through." And another leader, who's very, very quiet, sent me an IM to say, "Not everyone feels this way." And I'm 25% Jewish. You wouldn't know it, but many of my family members are Jewish and have spent time in Israel, et cetera. And all of a sudden I was put on the spot, like trying to both navigate my own feelings, but also try and coach these two leaders who, again, going back to a great multinational corporation, they've worked together for a decade and had an amazing, amazing partnership. And all of a sudden it was breaking down for the first time in their relationship. And I had to help them negotiate that. And so I think in our current age, global companies are a blessing, but it's also a really, really big burden. There are a couple of organizations that I didn't work for, but I know had similar issues. Like when Russia invaded Ukraine, there was a lot of pressure for American companies to stop operations in Russia. I have some friends that worked at Kraft Heinz Foods at the time, and they were asked, "Are you going to shut down your food operations?" Well, they looked into it, and actually one of the only major food distribution operations they had was for baby formula. And so they had to go back to their employees and say, "You know what? No, we're not. We're not. Like, we're not going to shut this down." And so that's I think the world we live in right now.
Yeah, and you have to be so dynamic in responding. Like you said, it's very responsive. You and I have talked about the fact that in our roles as people leaders, HR leaders, you often have to run right to where the friction is. Like that is our job, right? So I'd love for you to share a story about what's the ripple effect that influencing or having a powerful conversation with one leader can change their perspective in a way that can be felt organizationally.
Yeah. I think a lot of our dialogue about politics has changed and people are shying away, or maybe everyone except for your CEO are shying away from posting things, but these challenges still come up, which is probably why you guys are all in the room. I had a leader, we were trying to recruit someone who said, at the end of the day, for my family and friends, et cetera, I don't want to live in the South Peninsula in Northern California. And this leader was like, I just don't get it. Why wouldn't you want to live here? It's beautiful. Like, you can have a great career here. Why can't we, recruit the talent that we want? And this particular leader is Pakistani. And I said to him, you may not remember or recall, but this is a situation that I think for a lot of people, you can liken it to the partition between Pakistan and India. Even though that was, over 50 years ago, there are still portions of the country that one side or the other aren't going to go to. They're not going to go near the border. They're not going to want a vacation there. And so even though some of those scars aren't as deep in the places in which we operate, people are making those decisions every day. And we have to acknowledge that and honor that. And sometimes it's going to limit us. We're not going to get the talent that we want. And that's the decision we've had to make. And sometimes we can bend a little or look into other locations that might be more palatable. And so I think a lot of the skills that all of us have picked up in the past 5 years or so about how do you navigate this, they don't go away. You just use them in different ways. But it's very, very real. And that discussion, I would like to think, has changed this leader's thought process on how he shapes and grows his team for decades. Because he really, even though he didn't grow up in the United States or in certain parts of Europe, he started to see those areas very, very differently and was a lot more thoughtful about how to stage his talent plan.
Thank you. I think it's time for us to pivot. You get my seat. Thank you.
All right, Bex, I've got index cards.
Oh,
I feel like Oprah. All right, so when we talk about this particular topic, politics, you always start with saying, this is hard. Why why is that your intro? Why do you phrase it that way?
Because it is really hard, right? Um, I can, and we've all had these examples of, what are we going to do? And, there was one instance and, something had happened and I've got an employee messaging me on Slack. I've got the CEO saying, we need to speak. We need to get a statement out by 9 a.m. I've got the CEO texting me saying, I don't want to comment on this. Like, I'm not interested. I've got my team saying, okay, what are we going to do? We're going to get together. And it was like 6:35 in the morning. I was like, I've not even had a cup of tea yet. Like, I don't know. Like, and I don't know the answer. And so it's really hard, right? It's really hard because, as we've all stated, there isn't a playbook and every situation is different.
Mm-hmm. Have you, thinking through these scenarios, is there any situation that you would redo or there were big lessons learned?
I think being really clear on what you want to optimize for and really understanding the trade-offs that you're making and doing that really consciously. And I think if I kind of rewind back to about 5 years ago, it was, everybody's got to comment on everything. Like, it became kind of the trend. And I think a lot of mistakes were made because people really, or organizations really didn't think it through of like, why are we doing this and what are we optimizing for? And I think you can optimize for a sense, sorry, I think that's my alarm because I was on a timer. You had 2 more minutes. It's either time to get up or time to stop it. So you can either optimize for employee satisfaction, employee sense of belonging, inclusion. You can optimize for leadership focus. We don't want to be distracted by politics. We want to focus on what we're doing. You can optimize for its mission and vision, and it's about the purpose of the organization. It's often hard to optimize for all of them, and there are trade-offs with each of them. And when I was at Netflix, we said, we are going to optimize for a sense of belonging. and inclusion. And that meant that we talked about and we commented on all issues. And we said, we're going to talk about absolutely everything. But it's a big global company, and the the issues were fast and furious. There were many, many, and I feel that we fell short for a couple of reasons. One, often there were kind of generic sort of platitudes, like we'll comment on something, weren't particularly knowledgeable about it, and so it was a generic platitude that I don't think was particularly helpful. The second was the expectations that we had of leaders to be able to talk to issues was actually unfair, right? Because people are not experts in some of these complex issues. You talked about Israel and Palestine. This is like they're not experts in geopolitics or history, or yet we expected them to be. And so they'd set up safe spaces without scaffolding, and then everyone would be like, "Well, that was terrible." And then I think the third was, we weren't always willing to follow through with actions. And I think that really came to a head with the Dave Chappelle special. Has anybody seen the Dave Chappelle special, right? So we had a really clear strategy when it came to content, right? And rightly so, right? We were a talent-first organization, and we did not believe in censorship. And so as a content producer, every single day, all over the world, there are demands to take stuff down because someone doesn't like it, or a government doesn't like what's been shown, or an individual doesn't be like. And once you start letting yourself be censored, you no longer are a service, right? And so it was, we will never take anything down. We will fight and do whatever we need to keep content up. And Dave Chappelle did a special, and he said unkind things about trans people. And we had a really big trans community at Netflix, and they were quite rightly very upset by this and demanded that the content be taken down. And the answer to them was the same as the answer to many other individuals who'd asked us to take content down. No, we're not going to take it down. And in the end, there was an employee walkout. I think Ted Sarandos, the co-CEO, is being quoted publicly as saying, like, look, I screwed up in that instance. It was really difficult, right? It was really difficult for not only the trans community, but also many other people around them. But the sort of trade-off I think that we didn't realize that we were making, or weren't really clear about up front, is we are not going to follow through with some actions on this. And I think we misled people's expectations. And so I think being really clear on, we can still care for our employees, we can still care for different communities or different issues, and we are going to do what's right for our business, can hold true, but you need to set the expectation of where that line is. And I don't think we did a good job of that.
I think, are we done? Okay. Oh, okay. Like, I don't know what's happening. So I do think that while individually and collectively people have some fatigue about talking about these issues, I also think there's a good proportion of the population probably graduating from college right now that is still going to feel the same, right? There are terms like silence is violence. And, so if you think through that extreme, how can no comment be the right call? Like, how do you evaluate that?
Yeah. Again, I think it's about being clear on your why, right? I also worked for a company called 10x Genomics. And in 2021, I joined there. And the CEO, the first thing he said to me, it was also a life science company, scientists, engineers, said, I don't want to comment on anything, right? Like, I never want to talk about it. And here's why. Because we are producing tools that advance the understanding of human biology to help human health. The more time I spend talking on these issues, any issue, and not focused on our mission, lives are lost. And therefore, I am an expert on microbiology, And that's what I want to focus on. And I want to be really clear. And it's not that I don't care and I don't care about individuals. And if any of our team members need help or need support, we will do whatever we can to deliver that. But I don't want to comment on it. I want to focus on the mission of the organization. And to Kate's point around like finding religion, it was really easy to actually land that message in a mission-driven organization. People could get behind the mission. Now, it was 2021. It was not cool to do that then, right? Like, at first people were like, what? And he was like, no, I'm going to be really clear. Now, that worked for many, many years until Hamas invaded Israel. And the CEO got refugee status in the US, was part of the former Soviet Union, via Israel, and said, I feel real personal conviction that Israel has a right to exist. I am absolutely going to comment on this personally, publicly to the company. And we had this really long conversation of, I hear you, but we wrote a public culture document that is out there that said that you don't want to comment. And, if that's the stake you set, then you're suddenly now saying my issue is far more important than any of your issue. Mm-hmm. And you can't do both, right? And it was really hard for him, and we had a lot of conversations. And I was like, there are many team members that feel the same way about whatever their issue is. I feel the same way about Roe versus Wade. And I went for some really long runs when we did not want to comment on it, right? And it was personally really hard. But that's the stake you put in the ground. That's your why. And in the end, we didn't comment, right? Mm-hmm. But there is no right answer, but the wrong answer is always doing something, is kind of where your actions conflict with what you've said, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm.
So,
okay. Last question. Woo! What are you going to make it?
Right. So what's your 30-second close on this? What's sort of like the framework? What's the framework that you kind of apply when you think about?
I think one, be really clear on your why, be really clear on your trade-offs. And I actually think it's really, I know sometimes people in our roles are really kind of like, oh God, do we have to kind of debate every issue? Sometimes yes, but also bringing it back to the individual, right? It's really about empathy and helping individuals and saying, if we really want to create a great experience for our employees, that we might not comment on everything, but that doesn't mean to say that we don't care. And so individually getting leaders and managers to understand and know their employees and know what's important to them is really where I think it comes, because generic platitudes or some of that stuff isn't going to work. I mean, Kate's example worked because people got together and expressed empathy for each other. And that's where I think we need to focus. Thank you, Deb.
Yeah, that was so good.
Oh, I got to switch. Okay. So, Sally. Yeah. Now, you've done a lot of work on this. You've spoken to a lot of people. As you went out and interviewed CHROs, CPOs, leaders, yeah, what are some of the things that you found?
I found a lot of fear. I found people who are willing to say, I have a framework to share with you and you can't cite it. I have a story to tell you and you can't cite it. And so I was very grateful that the three of you are willing to share real stories. And I am able to distill some of the information down that they shared, which is essentially the political environment today is actually hotter. Like sometimes we just wonder, is it just me? Am I boiling in this water? And so I had to look at the data. So I went to my AI friend, and 60% of companies today say it's more challenging than 2020. And remember the other slide that we saw yesterday that showed how much uncertainty has changed in the last, was it 5 years? Do you remember that? So it's helpful, I think, to have that context to say, oh, indeed, the fast and furious that you were feeling at Netflix, it's not slowing down. I mean, just look at our last week. There's nothing slowing down about this conversation. And yet, as my husband would say, we don't talk about the most important things often. We don't talk about sex. We don't talk about money. We don't talk about politics. Like, and these are things that affect our daily lives. So how do we create the spaces is really kind of where my curiosity landed was how might we, I like the design thinking entrance to that question. It's like, how might we create understanding where there is confusion? How might we tell stories that are really important and we can learn from? And that's what I'm really happy that some of you opted in for this today because it's really, really hard. One of the quotes that stuck with me was how someone at a very large organization said, her quote is, there is zero trust by employees when you don't have a clear strategy and it results in leaks to the press and Slack chaos. I was like, yeah, right?
Been there.
Right. And so as leaders of people or leaders of whole organizations, what we're missing by not having a strategy, I hadn't really paid attention to until we started opening up this exploration.
Yeah. So tell us more about, I know that you've kind of, having spoken to these people, you've put together a framework of how we can develop that strategy. So tell us more about it. What, you've got slides? Oh my God. It's like you knew the question.
It's like we prepared. Thank you. So basically, we learned, and I say we because I did share this consideration with the panel because everything is a work in progress. And so the important thing to understand is positional power and when are we going to use it, right? And this could be for us individually, it can be for our leaders of our organizations. But if we think about trust as the North Star, because without trust, really, what are we doing? There's just no goodness that comes from that. So prepared leadership is about predetermining things that we know are going to happen. So how might we know? For example, Patagonia is my favorite example. I brought it up earlier. Patagonia is the only organization that I put in this TED Talk that I did 10 years ago on the future of work, because when I was testing it, I was talking about Gap and all these other companies that were doing forward thinking things 10 years ago. And when I tested it with my audience, the CHRO of EA, you might know Gabby Toledano, was like, that's adorable that you're putting all these companies in there. No, it's just going to be Patagonia. And she wasn't wrong, because there are some companies that their North Star is so clear that you can cite them, you can follow them, you can see from their leadership. And then there's other companies where when the CEO changes, things change, right? And so back to the trust, sometimes we trust an individual, sometimes we trust an organization, sometimes we trust a government, sometimes we trust, leaders in our community. But that trust can shift pretty quickly. And so it's, I think, important to say, okay, how do we stay prepared for that trust? How do we think about informed silence? So back to the silence of like, when is silence? What was the word you said, Masi? Like, when silence is violence, right? Or when is silence a strategy? Because in fact, if we're going to be saving lives at 10x genomics, if we spend our energy here, we will not have the energy over here. So I think these are the things that came up. And the SMART methodology, someone else said, stay in your lane. Focus on what the comments are to your specific business, because then you're going to have more impact. And that's essentially what your CEO said it right. So what I loved about this, so I threw all of I literally just rambled my heart out with all of the interviews that I got. And this is what Claude helped me with. So there are times when we're going to specifically say, this is a public issue. Patagonia would be the perfect one, right? Or anything in life sciences with Roe v. Wade, or the vaccines, right? That's very clear public. But then the interesting thing with private, and Masi helped me think about this, was the short term versus long term. So sometimes your response needs to be short term. We have employees who are going to be spinning if we don't address this. And other times we might need to privately deal with something long term and think about, where are our partners in this? Are we a leader? Are we a follower? Are we in partnership? How do we stay strategic? And so just think about like a wider lens in reaction versus on or off, right? And that's what I liked, even within public and private, how might we think about this short term and long term? And then there's the like, okay, we're not going to engage, because as Netflix experienced, that's exhausting. So that was the first framework. Dun, dun. Then we come to the decision tests. So we talked a little bit, each person has already talked about the business connection. I don't think that needs much more content, but I love seeing you all taking pictures. So happy my time was worthwhile. The values alignment, the impact. This one I really think you talked about too with the impact of 10x genomics. I really appreciate that story is specific. The other thing that I think is really interesting in the Q&A I'd like to talk about it is how Roe v. Wade, some issues impact our employees and how might we talk about those. I want to deal with that in the Q&A. And that goes back to the stakeholder analysis. When is it employees? When is it our customers, right, who might be impacted? They don't get baby formula. Wait, I can't remember the baby formula, right? And when is it shareholders who are like, hey, you're doing this thing, but like, I would actually like you to focus on the reason I invested in your company, right? And then how, from a communications perspective, might we weave the fact that all of these are intertwined? So a stakeholder might not actually recognize that by addressing this, our employees are going to be more focused on doing their day job, and in fact, not addressing it would be against the stockholder price.
Yeah, different people sometimes come up with different answers to these questions. So
That's exactly right.
So sharing like, hey, we looked at this and there's the impact and
That's exactly
this is
right.
why. Like
Right.
employees might think, oh, you know, we should do this and there's this impact and it's not necessarily how you're seeing it.
That's exactly right. And I think to a certain extent back to that like areas of gray of like it's going to harm one thing and it's going to benefit another, and then how might we make those decisions and trade-offs? So we like to think about the actions that can come from this. Curious in the audience, raise your hand if you already have a framework in your organization of how you're going to respond. Okay, raise your hand if you would wish you had a framework, but so far your leadership has not come up with a framework. Okay, a little bit. All right, raise your hand if that framework has served you and you've never had a deviation. Oh my God, for the the video, zero hands. Raise your hand if the framework has helped but not been sufficient. Yeah, that's kind of what I felt like we saw as well. So consider these approaches, but knowing that in fact we're still all improving and making it up as we go along.
I just think the improv is inevitable, right? Yeah. I don't think that there's an escape from it.
I think Amy Faye had it, or Tina Fey had it right, which is improv is the rules for life, right? It's a yes and. So I invite our other panelists to come up. I really want to hear from you, and I also want to hear wisdom in the room. Okay, so we want you to learn through story. We want it to always be real. So thank you each for that. We also want to keep it real with you. What are the problems and questions that have emerged or you came in with that these brilliant people, go for it, can start? Oh, the Slack chaos. You heard me quote you? Yes. Right. That's exactly right. Yeah. 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 Right. Anyone? And it's a workplace safety issue. Right. Jennifer.
Jennifer?
Do you have a consideration?
Wait.
It's for the video.
All right, for the video.
Thank you, Kate.
I think there's a real challenge because we often have values around authenticity for our leaders, and we tell them they need to be vulnerable. And many of our companies have values around belonging. And so, how do you navigate the fact that the issue that you might want to talk about is going to create dissent or discord within your organization? So I think one of the things we're not doing that we need to do is teach people how to have valuable and positive discussions about things they disagree on. And we don't teach that. We don't teach, like, if you're lucky, you had a course on debate when you were in high school, right? If you went to a great school who had that, like, kind of thing and you had time for it. But just like we need to teach resilience, we need to teach discord and disagreement in a healthy, like, constructive way. And we don't do that. So maybe that is something we can do in companies now when we know that not everyone is going to think the same thing.
Yeah.
Well, I have two thoughts on that. I think one is at times companies adopt new policies without explaining the why. So I think first and foremost, you have to feel really comfortable that the why, public health and safety, is coming across. I think with all the, have you ever had a situation where you've written someone up and they're like, oh gosh, golly, I can't talk to anyone now. Like, I've offended you and I just can't get a word out. And it's like, how am I supposed to operate? And it's like having people sort of understand, we brought you here for a job. When we interviewed you, we liked what we saw and we want to see more of that again. And similar with, like, I think vaccines, dress codes, right? Companies have certain protocols for different reasons because whether it's a local law or, worries about insurance, et cetera, and if you can explain that why and connect it back to why someone's coming in for the job every day and point to some of the other things that the company asks of them that are really more about keeping the community safe or keeping the community working, as opposed to feeling like it's an individual, like, an oppressive, opportunity. I think that's the most you can do. And I like the overlay of the how do we teach people? Because this is public knowledge, I can say this. Google does not have necessarily a cultural statement, like we're not going to comment on anything, but they do have community guidelines where they're like, if you're upset about something or talking about something, it's a try it. It's like, be helpful, be respectful, and I forget the third one. Do you remember the third one? But anyway, it's a, yeah, exactly. So anyway, overlaying that filter, I think allows you to say, okay, you're upset about the vaccine, but are you hitting the mark on these community guidelines? Are you allowing your teammates to be productive even though you're upset? Are you being respectful even though you're upset? And that's another way you can sort of redirect the conversation. So hopefully it diffuses a bit.
The other thing I'll add, and then I want to pull you on how you're doing the COVID vaccine, is the difference of geography. So when I was talking to one CPO, she was saying that in the Bay Area, which is where we are right now, employees all felt like we're all in agreement that the trust and safety of the COVID vaccine, we're not going into the office unless we're all vaccinated, and we do want the star of whatever, right? I hate to bring that up, but for people who are going to put us at risk and put our families at risk. Like, they were very clear about it. And the CPO said, and then we went to our Salt Lake office. Salt Lake office employees had a very different perspective on it. And so is it a company issue? Is it a geo issue? So she basically said same thing of like, ugh, like, this isn't super easy. And it goes back to like percentage of, like, all the things around the mission of the company, the size, the location, and that complexity comes up with the answer, which is that there's not an answer. It depends on all of these factors.
Yeah, and I think it's the culture as well, right? Like, I mean, life science companies, like,
This one was not hard for us.
yeah, right? It's like, yeah, sure, it's science, right? The same almost with kind of debate and dissent, right? Like, I want you to disagree because that's how I innovate. And so, okay, I'm really curious about, well, why do you think this? And so on. Yeah, right. I do think there's that kind of curiosity and helping people understand, like, we don't have to agree the same thing, and you might do things that I think are sort of out there, or I don't want to be part of. Like, I don't know, for me personally, in England, even the police don't own a gun. So, like, the fact that, like, people own guns, I'm like, it's so strange to me. But that's okay. Tell me more about it, right? And so there is this curiosity that I think we need to teach people, which in a high uncertain environment, we are biologically predetermined to be like, I want people around me that are similar to me,
Yeah.
right? Like, it's where
Similarity
I feel
bias.
safe. It's
Yeah.
how when I was a cave person, how I survived,
Yeah.
and that whether consciously or unconsciously is triggered. And so but I think it all does come back to kind of the culture of the organization, right? Like, and the vaccine one, absolutely.
Right. And then this goes to, like, people have the law of 2 feet too, right? It's like if they want to leave that organization, they can leave that organization. And it gets trickier when it's government and other things that then, right?
Yeah. I think that that's like also important. You can't be all things to all people, right? And you have to sometimes say, this might not be the right place for you, right?
Yeah. Right. Right. And you have a choice to work where you want to work. Right.
We have
Yeah.
a question in the back.
I feel like there's been maybe one company or more in the news who are famously apolitical or don't want to have a stance or don't want to talk about it. I know
Yeah.
some people have worked at some of these companies, and I've always wondered what it's really like. I'm kind of skeptical. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on, we've been talking about this. People are like, well, we're not going to talk about it at all. I don't know how that works.
Yeah.
Great
Always
question.
a troublemaker. I do have a story about being a troublemaker at McKesson. So I was at McKesson for 7.5 years. I saw a CEO transition. So with my first CEO, whose tenure I was there for, we were famously not going to comment on anything. And I remember we had an annual senior leader meeting every November. And in this particular year, it was right after Trump had first been elected. And it was like the open forum Q&A. And so with my heart literally in my throat, I was like, I imagine that we have employees who are having lots of different feelings right now. And I'm just wondering, some probably happy, some less happy. What advice do you have for us as leaders on how we can best support our teams? Because I think that's really what I was imagining everyone else, including me, wanted to know in that room. It was so difficult to hear that CEO say, we're not going to comment on that. And I was like, I'm not asking you to comment on what you think about the election. I'm really not. I think I know how you feel about it, but I don't want to know. Don't. What I want to know is how, from a leadership perspective, help enable us to like create space. This was before creating space even became a thing that any of us were saying.
A great verb.
But like, I remember, I can now reverse engineer. Like, that's what I was looking for. Like, help us as leaders create space for this. And it was like, shut down. That is not our job as a company. And it was so demoralizing to have a very senior person be like, no.
Yeah.
And then we had a CEO transition.
Yeah, it was very different.
How
And it
quickly
was
thereafter.
and then we had George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. And thankfully, the new CEO, who had his head screwed on a little differently, was like, I guess we need to talk about these things. And the approach they took was, let us help you figure out how to make space, have conversations with your teams, acknowledging that we are a very global, diverse company and people are on different sides of these issues. How do you navigate it as a leader? It's just far more productive to try to give leaders tools, as I think we also heard, from Jennifer's comment, than to simply say, can't help you with that.
And what's fascinating is it's the same company. Like McKesson was pharmaceutical distribution for the most part, heavily regulated, under the gun for opioid litigation. Like there are a lot of reasons to say we're not going to say anything, but it was the same company that the new CEO took over, and he took a very different stance. So it's interesting.
Oh my God, we have so many good questions, but we have 3 minutes left. Go for it. Like it's rapid round. Scream it. I know.
Hi, I'm Jay. Thanks for making the time and sharing the stories. My current role is focused on internal comms, and so I'm kind of curious. I realize some of this might have been shorthand for the sake of the panel, but oftentimes when these issues get debated in companies, there's people leaders and CEOs or other leaders. There's also communications or public policy or legal, and I'm curious how you all have, or anyone want to share how you've sort of navigated some of that from your perspective as a people leader specifically. How has that played out in terms of different companies and some of the equities that come to light when some of those functions that are typically involved start weighing in and you need to make a decision?
Yeah, I mean, for me, internal comms is just a critical partner, right? Like, how do we want to position this? What, let's go through whatever framework we're using, and then how do we position that? And just, never going at it alone. And so I always have a table of advisors because it's like, okay, we've missed, what about this perspective or this person, or how is that going to land, right? And so for me, internal comms has always been, no, always will be a critical partner. Because I think whatever message, whatever you decide to say and whatever framework, whether it's kind of the silence or discuss everything, it still needs to be navigated super carefully, right?
So we'll stay after for those of you who didn't get your questions answered. I want to leave you with one other consideration. Oh, were you going to get that
We've got
question?
one question.
I'll make time. I didn't realize you were up there. Sorry.
In the world we're in now, we're seeing CEOs of tech companies going and hanging out with Trump because it's good business.
Right.
And that may or may not be something that their workforce agrees with.
Sure.
And so I'm just like, ugh.
Right.
But I wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
Ugh, sums it up, I think.
All right. I'm going to weigh in on one thing that's it's sort of a yeah, exactly. Little softball. Thanks, Andrea.
I think, I mean, I do think, look,
You're like, have you seen the South
CEOs
Park?
change, there are transitions, you talked about a transition that was for the better. Sometimes it doesn't work that way, right? And I think it's really difficult for me, I thankfully haven't experienced that, but I think I would have to kind of center myself and ask myself if I still wanted to be there and carry that message and sort of front all of that as HR. We front a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Not really my jam, right? But I also think for many other employees as well. I think that, and I'm sure even the transition you went through, there were probably other people that disagreed of like, I don't want to comment.
I mean,
on
I'm
stuff
thinking about it from the perspective of in our seats, if someone came to me and that was their issue, like I'm unhappy with how our CEO is representing our company, the question framework I think I would run through is like, is my leader behaving in a way that's consistent with the values I understood from that leader, the organizational values, and my personal values?
Yep.
And if those things don't line up, then there's friction to investigate. Either it's a conversation with your leader, like the one you had, Bex, where it's like, hey, your behavior is not consistent with our organizational values. And they might say like, yeah, fuck off, and then we can walk with our feet. It could, I think that type of ethical leadership is that consistency, that through line of values, and that's what I would investigate. And we might wind up counseling our employees like, this is not necessarily something we can fix.
Right.
And if your personal values, you thought they were aligned with the organization and the CEO was aligned with the organization, and if one of those things breaks, it will break.
Yeah. I'll just leave you with one quick story that I heard across, and you've all mentioned it too, and then we'll stay for questions for anyone who didn't answer, which is it is both big and personal, right? So we're thinking about the large picture of an organization and a leader, and sometimes they're very large organizations, and this person might not have impact on them. I would just encourage you back to the actions that you can take to have individual conversations with people. So um, when I meet with my team, if we don't check in personally of just how things are going, once we didn't do this. I joined a team call. I did not check in with anyone because it wasn't my call and I didn't want to leave. So I was listening. And at the end of the call, I did what I do because I am more of a touchy feely person, which now Vivian told me means foundational skills. She said touchy feely and like soft skills are super 1900s. It's foundational skills. So I use my foundational skills at the end to just say, like, and how's everyone doing? Because we had a few minutes at the end and we didn't do it at the top of the hour because the leader wanted to bang through the stuff, which I totally respect. And then one of the employees said, well, if I'm not really focused today, I just want you to know some of the kids on our block were lost in the Texas flood. And I was just like, I just learned about this in the 28th minute of this 30-minute stand-up call. So I just encourage you to keep things personal, keep things like that real, like check-in. Like even if an org, Lindsay, doesn't say like, we're not gonna comment on stuff, that's okay. If you choose to be in that org, you can still check in and be like, hey, before we jump in, highs and lows for anyone today? Like anything, whatever way in which you can make it real, just gives them the space to be like, yeah, I'm not gonna be productive today. And maybe this week, right? So anyway, I would offer both the big stuff and then the heart. And thanks for coming.